My name is Eugene Fernandez. I'm the director of a 501c3 nonprofit public charity foundation that goes by the name of South Texas Center for Historical and Genealogical Research, otherwise known as History Central. And I'm making this particular broadcast in order to cover a very, very unique story. If you are reading from this QR code and pulling it up on your cell phone, whatever, then that's you're going to hear quite a story about the Montezuma cypress. There is a distinction. A lot of you may be familiar with the cypresses that are there on the San Antonio Riverwalk. Well, that's a cousin to what you see here in this preserve. You've seen the name, the moniker there, Montezuma Cypress Preserve. Well, that's a legal name. I went through City Commission and got that registered. So now it has a formal name and boundaries. The boundaries being where the historic bridge is, the 1898 bridge, that's about halfway the length. There's half on each side that constitutes 1/2 mile. Now, this is a very unique ecosystem for the world, for that matter. The Montezuma cypress is present here. We've got 41 magnificent examples of that species that go all the way up and down this Resaca de la Palma. The way they got here is interesting because 10,000 years ago, the seed process and the forming of the Delta and the Rio Grande and all of that. All right, let's start where they started, and that was in the Mexican state, the southern portion called the state of Michoacan or Oaxaca. That region. That is the home field for your Taxodium mucronatum, which is this particular species. To broaden that discussion, I've already discussed the bald cypress in San Antonio, and then those of you that have been through Louisiana, you see the ones out in the water, and also in the Everglades where you see the ones out. That's what's called a pond cypress or a Taxodium distans. You see, there are characteristics that really create separate subspecies of the Taxodium. Okay, so getting back to Mexico. As I say, before 10,000 years ago, those particular rivers that were formed in the interior of Mexico, heading north, mind you, then once the Rio Grande was formed, it formed from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains up in Colorado and in that region, and broke out of rims by the ancient landscape, and then eventually reached the Gulf. So that's that story. All right. So once that it was capable of entering into other waters, as I say, joining with the Rio Grande, then it was swept south. The seeds were swept south, and that constitutes our population down here. It is a very distinct requirement that tree has as far as the development and the germination of it. It's got to be in almost stagnant waters like lagoons, resacas, as we have here, and so that's the birth of the species for our region. And the ones that we have here, as I say, were very unique in the world. Indeed so, because the 41 that we have here were planted by the hand of God. The other ones that you see about are 20th century items, and they were planted by the hand of man. These actually came through, actually there was a fallen tree that we did a ring count on, and we counted 175 rings, which translates to 175 years. Now that was not the large tree that we have in our population here. There are trees that there's no doubt that they're within the 300-year range. 300 years, that's before we even had a republic in this country. So these are very, very precious inhabitants of our landscape. Now, when I mentioned that this is a 1/2 mile long resaca bed, it is a diminutive leg of the Resaca de la Palma. It's I say, and in the formation of a distributary, it's not an old channel of the river, as some people say. No, There are old channels of the river, but the Resacas are formed as a breakout from the original river. And mind you, back in the days before the dams and levees and all of that, upon spring snow thaw, that's when you had to have the purge of water coming through, and the escape valve came in these distributaries coming out. Now, what did they have a plane to go on? That's a delta, and you see the delta was formed eons ago as the tailings and of the washings down of the river, the soil mounted on the continental shelf, and then it built up and built up and built up, and then you had a process of whereby water has to almost go uphill. And so that's how you had the Resacas formed. And you have like 5 major Resacas in this region. All right, the plan for this particular Resaca is an interesting one because we have a union of entities that have come together. Congress back in, I think it was 1999 or some in the 90s, they passed a bill because they recognized, God bless them, they recognized that the Resaca formations here on the Delta were disappearing because of encroachment of developers, and they were filling in Resacas, blocking them off and whatever. Well, that is an ecosystem no-no. Of the deltas that we have in this world, you have the Mekong Delta, you have the Nile Delta, and you got the Delta of the Rio Grande, in this area. So they took measures in order to preserve and no further deterioration of the delta paths, of the Resaca paths in this delta region, which is wonderful. All right, how do we come up to modern day on that? The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they conducted a very decade-long study on various aspects, feasibilities, you know how they go, and they just concluded one to give it the green light to take this segment. As you can see, you probably look at the Resaca and you say, well, there's no water in the Resaca. How can it be a Resaca? Well, because we cut it off. I cut it off, actually, back in the year 2013 when I started working on the refurbishing of the 1898 bridge. We were down below the bridge there and salvaging the bricks so we can utilize them in the refurbishing effort. And so we had to cut off the water. And once we finished that, and we did I got the grant in order to do the bridge, then I called for the water, and it took them something like, I don't know, 7-8 years for the water to be brought back. And then to my horror, back in the year, I think it was 2019, I was doing a survey, and I started noticing that there was a neighboring property here that had what's called the junior champion tree. And I went up to him and I said, can I take a photo of the junior champion? He says, you mean the dead junior? See, you see, we had a drought period combined with the irrigation district cutting off various segments. They have to live in water. That's the one thing about a cypress, and the people down here are not familiar with cypresses. They think that ambient moisture can let us trees survive. No, it's not the case. And so I went before City Commission, and I really put on a crusade in order to get the water back in. And thankfully so, the city administration saw that we had the possibility of having a river walk down here in South Texas, equally as beautiful. But I lost 10 trees in that drought period. So we quickly oriented around where we got the water diverted from the river for irrigation purposes, and then resealed the Resaca bottom because the fissures had grown in that, and it wouldn't retain water. But now, after those many years, about 5 years, 6 years, we put it in periodically. I put it in every 90 to 120 days. And so therefore we do have water in. All right. At present, with the silt that's in that diminutive leg, if you put full charge of water in it to bank line, traditional bank line, you will only have 2 feet to 2.5 feet maximum of water depth at center line Resaca. So that does not create a healthy ecosystem. The plan is that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is going to come in shortly now and do what's called a dry dredge and prep the area, the Resaca bottom, and bring it back to its natural formation. And then we'll put water back in. And when I say dry dredge, we're going to go down in order to create a water depth of about 4 feet. Now that's a reasonable depth for the recharging of this Resaca. And then, of course, Public Utilities Board is in the picture because they're going to utilize that half-mile stretch as a reservoir for our city water. So it'll hold a multitude of functions. And then, of course, in my almost 20 years on this project, to nurture this body of water for a park. And you can imagine the kayaking and the bankside picnic tables overlooking these beautiful cypress trees. So there you have it. You have a wonderful story about the cypresses coming through. Now, when the Spaniards came, I'm going to divert for just a moment. When the Spaniards came through this part of the country in the 15th century, they kept logs. They were very meticulous about what assets they had in the New World. Minerals, timber, you name it. Well, they noted they didn't know what to call it because the species had not been defined in Western Europe at the time. They called it it was a cousin of the cedar, or the savane, or whatever. But anyway, there's mention of that there. And in the total mention, there is a census say, because they want to know what inventory, there were 10,000 of these beautiful primordial trees from the tree line, which is about 3 miles from the mouth of the river, from the Gulf, up to the confluence, as I mentioned, the San Juan River by Falcon Dam. 10,000 of them. Well, they're not there any longer. What happened to them? How can you lose 10,000 trees? Well, it is the only lumber tree in this region. And so in the 50 years of the colonization of Brownsville, which happened in 1849, up to the turn of the century, say 50 years, they decimated all of them. So going on about 3 years ago, I started a project. It was a cypress seedling incubator. And I grew 400 of these seedlings. And I've managed to put out in the community to repopulate, reforestate the region. I'm not saying that I'm going to do 10,000 of them, but nonetheless, I've got a good head start on them. In the Brownsville region, I have distributed at least 200 to 250 of the trees. So therefore, we've got to start on it. That's what that part of my project is all about. So it's a beautiful story about a beautiful tree. And I really appreciate your attention on this. It is something that it's a labor of love for me. And so many people in this region now see the magnificence of this tree. So they are getting on board with this project. I'm so happy to see. So thank you very, very much. I want you to enjoy any tours that you might have in this area. Please look my social page up on Facebook. It's under Eugene Fernandez, and I have a lot of material on the cypress trees. So thank you for your attention. Good day.